Welcome to the Harvard Veterans Alumni Organization podcast, where we connect, bridge, and honor the Harvard veteran community.
Lance, pleasure to have you here. Thanks for coming. How are you?
Pleasure to be here. I'm doing great, and I'm excited about, having a great conversation with you.
All right, Lance. So tell us a little bit about you. You were in the Army. You were a JAG, and you worked for the DOJ, right?
Yeah, so I worked previously for the Department of Justice as a federal prosecutor, and I'm currently still in the Army Reserve. So I've been a reservist for right about a decade, a little short of it, and I'm currently an IMA, individual mobilization augmentee, with an active duty unit.
Awesome. So take me through your journey, right? So high school, where'd you go to high school? Where are you originally from?
Yeah, so it's kind of I think I don't want to call it complicated, but there's little different layers. I was born in East Texas in Texarkana, which is in a very kind of unique subregion called the Arklatex, but the hometown of Ross Perot, for instance. But grew up or born there, but soon after my family relocated to the Dallas Metroplex, and that's because my father who was also from Texarkana, was a pastor and had built a sizable congregation in Texarkana, and then he had an opportunity to start another church in a fast-growing part of Dallas at the time, which was kind of northern Carrollton. So for those that are in Dallas Metro now or familiar with, Carrollton's kind of in the middle of the city, but at that time, it was right at the edge in the late 80s of the growth of the Metroplex. And so he started another congregation there, and that's where I grew up. But I went to high school in Coppell, Texas, which is northwest Dallas County, and graduated from Coppell High School.
Gotcha. And you went to UT Austin, right?
Yes. So after high school, ended up attending and graduating from the University of Texas at Austin. And I'm very proud of the Longhorns this year. They're looking good. Their inaugural season in the SEC.
So you graduated from Texas, and you decided to go to law school right away, right?
Yeah. So, the long-term goal, really kind of as far back as elementary school was to become a lawyer. I didn't necessarily know what it meant to be a lawyer, and I really didn't even know what it meant to be a lawyer even through most of law school. But I knew that was my trajectory. And so really the, entire time when I was at college, I was focused on the next step and started law school. I took a brief break for a year between college and then starting law school. And then I started at the Southern Methodist University in Dallas.
So would you recommend that break for anyone thinking of law school? That nice break in between undergrad and law school? I hear a lot of people do that, right? They need that time to decompress and maybe join the workforce for a little bit and then go to law school. Is that something that you advocate or just like a happy accident?
No, it's not an accident. I probably should have gone a little more detail. I started law school actually at Notre Dame immediately after, and I graduated a year early from college. So I went immediately from UT in Austin to South Bend, Indiana, and it kind of coincided with some other things that were going on back home. And so I had a massive culture shock going from kind of Austin, which is this kind of a college mecca, to being kind of in, the Rust Belt and in small town Rust Belt. And anyway, I decided Notre Dame wasn't for me. And so after about 6 weeks, I decided to withdraw. And that was, right after SMU had confirmed they were going to honor my admission and my scholarship at SMU. So, so I think kind of to answer your question, yes, I do. And the reason is that we have, in this kind of a more philosophical question, people are so rushed. Like if they go do one thing for 1 year, other than this kind of work trajectory, then they're going to lose their competitive edge. And, it becomes this kind of mentality where you are constantly hustling. And if you don't do that, you're going to fail. Whereas I feel like, particularly in your early 20s, that's the optimal time to take risk and have experience and see the world because, really you don't have many, obligations and responsibilities. And at that time, that's when you really are in somewhat of your formative years. You're entering adulthood, probably, been in for a couple of years, but really kind of now in the workforce or about to look at the workforce or grad school. And so, yeah, I think it's a great opportunity to do something else, join the military or do something other than just going straight into grad school.
Yeah, for sure. Like I said, a lot of people that I talk to, they advocate for a break. So you get into law school at SMU, you graduate 2013, right? Now, at some point during law school, did you figure out what it meant to be a lawyer, or what kind of law you wanted to practice, or what was your moment during law school?
Well, in reality, it kind of happened through happenstance. I graduated 2013, and by this point, the economy was still doing pretty poorly. We had the crash in 2008, and then you had a couple, 5 or 6 years of kind of the after effects, but before things started to seem to come around. And I had put all my eggs in one basket because I was like, I'm going to be a JAG officer. I'm going to go straight in. And really, I wanted to be a Marine. And I ended up getting waitlisted for the Corps and applied to every branch. I mean, Army, Air Force, Navy. I had my preference, of course, but I was like, okay, I'm going to serve. And if one of the branches takes me, then I'm going to go. And this kind of was at the point of force reduction. When we were leaving Iraq, we're still in Afghanistan. I don't think we were yet really actively engaged in Syria, but the point is that we were in force reduction. And so it was just very competitive and it was hard to get in. Also, because of the economy, officers weren't leaving the military. They're kind of staying in, biding their time. And there just weren't a lot of slots. So when I didn't get in, I kind of was standing around thinking, man, what am I going to do? Because I had really said this is going to be my at least immediate, short-term future. And that's where Harvard came into the picture.
Gotcha. So before we get into Harvard, just for anyone who may be thinking about taking your route, could you explain a little bit about applying into the JAG program? Because a lot of people think that you can just commission, right? It's a different program than just commissioning as a second lieutenant and just going into the fleet. As a JAG officer, you have to apply to this program, correct?
Yeah. So, it's not an easy route. I mean, it's very competitive, even during times when they're looking to recruit. And right now, it's probably, if you're thinking about going to the JAG Corps, it's never going to be easier than today. Because, it's one of these things where you get a certain military, you get, a fairly interesting, varied career, get a, kind of punch your ticket and do different things. You can be in an SF unit or be attached to one. You can, same with Ranger Bats or Intel. I mean, you can be in a lot of different units. Ultimately, your regiment is the JAG Corps, at least in the Army. I can't really speak too much about other branches. I have a little bit of insight. My experience has all been in the Army. But yeah, I would say, the process is you need to, of course, graduated from university, be in or graduated from an ABA accredited law school. And I believe, I mean, it's optimal you pass the bar before you go, but some people were waiting on bar results, and that became a problem when one or two of them failed. And so they actually had to leave, go finish the bar to come back and get their slot. But yeah, I mean, it's a lengthy process. It took me about a year to fully assess into the Army, through all the different, like I have tattoos, and so I had to get them all, wavered in and signed off on and translated, and so forth. And, but yeah, it took me about a year. So be proactive. And then once you're in and you get your date to go to basic training, it's a great feeling.
Gotcha. Yeah, for sure. The is there people that like have to apply a couple times before they get in, or is it like one? You know what I mean? Like, is that how that works?
I think most people applied multiple times, particularly kind of in my cohort because of the way the economy was. Um, but some people do get in the first time. They're called FLEPs. I couldn't tell you what the actual acronym means, but a FLEP is a mainline branch officer who's completed most of their term, and then they basically sign a new contract to go into the JAG Corps, and the JAG Corps actually pays for their law school. So we had about a third of my JAG class that were FLEPs, which was great because our cadre were, I think, like terminal captains and terminal staff sergeants. So they were kind of like, where do we stick this guy? We'll let him train the JAGs. So it ended up being the FLEPs were the ones that actually trained us and kind of squared us away. But yeah, I think there's multiple paths, and some people have it easier than others. But if you don't get in the first time, keep applying. I mean, that's how I ended up, again, getting in after about 2 or 3 tries.
Gotcha. So you finished law school at the same time you're applying for the Army. So then that's when you go into the extension school. Is that correct?
Yeah. So I was kind of, again, at a loss because I'm sitting there going like, what am I going to do? I mean, I needed to figure it out, and I had been so kind of myopic on one career path. And I had some interest in oil and gas law because this was kind of in the time when the shale boom was kind of at its peak at that point. But yeah, I really didn't know. And so I just thought, okay, well, perhaps there's another way for me to, get a little bit more experience, expand my horizons, and did a little bit of research and figured out, the School of Continuing Education existed at Harvard. It was legit, and one of the constituent entities and schools of the university. And that's when I decided I was going to take on that challenge. And so I did my first courses kind of actually middle of law school, actually, before I decided to fully go into the program. So I had some of the leg up. I did the pro seminar, kind of earlier in my law school career, but then afterwards I used that to actually enter the degree program.
That's awesome. Now, where were you living before applying to the extension school?
At the time, I had moved back home. So I was in Dallas, and, I grew up there. So I moved back home after law school, just to kind of figure out like, what is my next step? And so that was kind of home base again until I was able to get out of the extension school and, join the Army.
That's awesome. What did you think about campus?
Oh, I loved it. I mean, it was such an amazing opportunity and experience. And one thing that kind of sticks with me of my experience was I had bought a book about like the architectural history of the main campus, and I was walking around and I'm reading, and this is kind of particularly interesting to me as a Texan, but it was Ralph Waldo Emerson was writing in 1836 about the bicentennial festivities of Harvard, right? And so he's there actually at the 200th anniversary of the university. And I'm thinking that's the same year the Alamo happened. So the same year Texas became an independent country in 1836 and the Alamo occurred and so forth, with the same year Harvard turned 200. So in terms of time depth, I mean, that kind of put it in a little bit more perspective for me of just really how aged of a place it was and how many interesting people and, George Washington quartering his horses and Harvard Hall and mustering the Continental Army across the way and so forth. I mean, it's just there's just so much going on there.
Yeah, absolutely. So what is your degree on?
So I got my master's in international relations. I had an interest for some time in, Europe in particular. And I would say Europe generally and Britain in particular, but I had decided, this was kind of right during the middle of the build up to the Scottish independence referendum in 2014. And so I took on that as a a case study actually to, you know, analyze the relationship between the European Union and subnational independence movements. And so, Scotland was kind of an ongoing, and I guess you could say upcoming kind of event, their vote to leave the United Kingdom. And then, of course, you had other movements like Catalonia and so forth that were still hot topics. But I focused in on Scotland, and that's what I ended up writing my master's thesis on.
That's awesome. Well, congratulations on graduating. And hopefully I'll be there soon. I think this is my last class. Pretty excited.
Now, curiosity?
Yeah. So you graduate, and now you are part of the Army JAG Corps, right? At this point, you enter into the JAG Corps, and you're commissioning at Fort Benning, correct? Like you go through OCS at Fort Benning, and then you commission, right?
More or less, yeah. So I graduated from Harvard in May of 2015. And I mean, that was, you're going to have a great experience at commencement. I wore shorts and tennis shoes under my robe because it was about as hot as I've ever been. So thinking of like guys wearing white ties, and black ties, I just said, I know there's formality, but I'm going to be somewhat comfortable. That was an incredible experience. And like Steven Spielberg, I think was our commencement speaker, and it was just a cool, experience. So, but yes, after that, got ready that summer, and then made the trek out to Fort Benning. I didn't actually go through OCS. So lawyers go through what is called ECC, Direct Commission Course, and it's a little bit different. It's an abbreviated course, so to speak. We did 6 weeks. We lived in the OCS barracks, but it's more of, a gentleman's course. You get off most weekends, and evenings kind of to yourself and do what you want. You can leave post if you wanted to. But you did have a pretty rigorous schedule, and we ran a ton. The JAG Corps, at least in the Army, they like to think they're like super hua. If guys are running, your enlisted soldiers running, 2 7-minute miles, you need to run 2 6:30-minute miles. So there was a high premium placed on running, and I ran as much as I ever have. But there was still a lot of liberty. And then after, actually leaving Fort Benning, where I actually never was a butter bar. So when you're a newly minted JAG, you skip butter bar, you go straight to first lieutenant. And that's because they credit you the time that you were in law school to time and grade, because it's training, right? So the way they look at it is like, you did 3 years, so you did 3 years in grade. So it doesn't affect your pay, but it affects your rank and promotion. But that being said, went to Fort Benning, left Fort Benning, and then went to the JAG school, which is outside of University of Virginia in Charlottesville.
Gotcha. And how long was that?
The JAG school was longer for sure. It was probably like 4 months, 3.5, 4 months.
That's not bad at all. So like,
no,
total training time, what would you say, like maybe 5 months total if you're aggregating the entirety of ECC?
More or less.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. DCT and then JOBC. They're so your advanced training. Yeah, it's about that. It's not an extreme amount of training, but then again, you had to do 3 years of law school. So that's kind of what they consider part of your MLS, like your, AIT or whatever you want to call it.
So is there a specific type of law that you can do as a JAG officer, or are you a general JAG officer? Like, just like a little background about me, like I became a citizen when I was in the Marine Corps, and a JAG officer was the one that like helped me through my immigration process. And I had no idea they even had the knowledge to do any kind of immigration law. So I thought they were just prosecutors or defense attorneys.
No, so there's a number of core competencies, and if I told you it was 5, it's probably 7, but it's something around there. So yeah, I mean, you typically as a JAG officer you're gonna be a generalist to some extent. And that's the way they look at promotion. So when I was promoting between captain to major, one of the things they considered was diversity of experience, that you've been in different types of units and different geographic locales and so forth. But yeah, you're gonna at the very least probably do legal assistance. That was probably an attorney that helped you. Legal assistants are the JAGs that you typically meet that do your wills and things of that nature, give basic legal advice. They deal with retirees and their questions and helping soldiers, for instance, get out of predatory loans. So that's kind of what you generally start with, but then you go to either becoming a trial counsel, which is a prosecutor. Usually defense attorneys like TDS, Trial Defense Services, they're going to be more seasoned JAGs just because there's a little bit, again, more import on the defense. You do have administrative law JAGs that do, like my current billet, I'm in a national security law billet. Yeah, it used to be called LOAC, Law of Armed Conflict, or OB law, operational law. But those are the JAGs that advise commanders on the laws of war and utilization of like military assets and with civilian populations and posse comitatus and things of that nature. And probably missing on contract law and fiscal law. So, the Army, of course, deals with contracting and contractors and flippals and all the fun stuff that we've probably all heard of. So, yeah, I mean, there's a variety of different competencies. What's happened, though, with the JAG Corps, at least in the Army, has been that there was and it really depends on who TJAG is, the JAG. When I first got into the JAG Corps, the JAG, she was very focused on diversity of experience and didn't want people being kind of pigeonholed or creating expertise because they want more, flexibility with where they place you, so they can really plug and play any JAG anywhere. But the problem is that you end up with, individuals who are extremely talented, let's say defense attorneys or prosecutors, and then you're sticking them in a contract position and they're just miserable. And so they either get to do what they like or forego promotion, right? And it's kind of one of those deals where, so there's been a cultural change where they are allowing a little bit more specialization, and it's not necessarily a career killer. But I think culturally, the JAG Corps still has some opposition to that.
Gotcha. What is your favorite type of law?
Well, I mean, I'm a litigator, and I found, in my professional career that being a prosecutor really, and now a defense attorney really was my forte and what I enjoyed, and it gave me the interesting experiences that I wasn't particularly getting in other types of law.
You get through JAG school. You're assigned to your first unit. Where did you go on your first unit?
Well, yeah, so I was a reservist. I had a reserve slot. My first unit was the 1st Legal Operations Detachment, 1st LOD. And so this is a very typical route for a reserve JAG. National Guard JAG is very different. They're more like active duty because they have a lot of combat units. But in the reserves, you're typically in non-combat roles, non-combat units. And so there are what are called LODs. And these are kind of, I would say, like holding pens almost for attorneys and paralegals in the military. So there's kind of an active, I think, basically a pool of attorneys they can draw from to backfill units and so forth. So I went to the 1st LOD. I always assumed there had to have been a Texan involved with numbering because the 1st was in Texas. And I was there for a couple years before I then made my transition into an embedded position.
Gotcha. So at this point, you graduated from Harvard. Where are you living now?
So I graduated from Harvard in 2015. I went back home for a couple months before I went to JAG school.
Gotcha. So you're in Texas right now, like in your first unit, and gotcha.
Yeah, I moved back and started working as an attorney.
Gotcha.
After JAG school. Yep.
So tell me a little bit about that, right? So you are a JAG now, and at this point, you are employed by the federal government, or did you do any other law firms before, or did you have any other jobs prior, or did you go straight into the Department of Justice?
No. There's a whole path to lead up to DOJ. So my very first job out of the JAG school, very first legal job was I was an assistant attorney general for the Texas Attorney General, working in Uvalde, Texas. And this is kind of famous now. People have heard of it because of the mass shooting, but really no one had heard of it before. It's the birthplace of Matthew McConaughey, if you didn't know that. But yeah, I mean, it's fairly close to the border. It's in South Texas. Definitely very different from, Dallas, Fort Worth. And I was doing civil work for the Texas Attorney General down there. And I did that for about a year, before getting my first prosecutorial job in, New Braunfels, Texas, which is north of San Antonio.
Gotcha. And I think we call them up here DAGs, the Deputy Attorney Generals. So we have levels, right? So like a level 1 will prosecute traffic offenses, level 2 misdemeanors, level 3 anything with like no victims, level 4, level 5. These are the guys that are like prosecuting higher level crimes and homicides. So did you get a chance to experience any of that, or what did you as a prosecutor?
No, I experienced everything as a prosecutor. But yeah, I mean, you're going to start off as a prosecutor I mean, there are exceptions. Like if you go to some, small rural West Texas, county where you're, really in these big open expanses. I mean, you could be given a murder on your first day of work because they just need you to do it. And I know people that have had that type of experience. In my case, luckily, I didn't have that happen. I was an assistant DA, is what most there are assistant county attorneys. The nomenclature changes depending on the county. But in the county I was working in initially, Como, I was an ADA, assistant DA, and I was assigned to the misdemeanor division. I did get a couple felony cases and was able to indict cases, almost initially. But the vast majority of the work that I was doing there was misdemeanor work, DWIs, assault, family violence, things of that nature.
Gotcha. Is there any case that stands out in your memory bank? Is it, that you're like, oh man, that was crazy, or something that you were really proud of as a prosecutor?
Yeah, more so though as like a federal prosecutor.
Gotcha.
Because you got to remember, I mean, and maybe I'm just projecting here, but I actually probably think this is the case. Many state prosecutors, their goal is to become a federal prosecutor, because it's thought of as like, in many ways, the pinnacle of the prosecutorial profession. You're dealing with large scale, racketeering or conspiracies or things like that, white collar crime, and you're working with the FBI and some of the federal agencies. So, I mean, I really did feel like my entire prosecutorial career in the state was angling to become a federal prosecutor. So yeah, I mean, there were definitely cases on the state side that were interesting to have taken part in, but really it was my federal experience that I feel was the most interesting and exciting.
So you had you had a set goal from the jump, right? Like you knew that you wanted to be in a different place.
Yeah, I mean, I just think I'm kind of like oriented that way in general. Like I'm never, you never have to ask me like, hey, what are you going to do next year? I probably have gotten at least a decent game plan together of what I'm going to be doing, if not for a couple of years. So yeah, I mean, I've always like, I look back when I was a kid, I never thought federal prosecutor. I knew I wanted to be a JAG because it's the 90s when the show was around. I thought, I'm going to be a fighter pilot, a lawyer, like crazy stuff, and you had a few good men and, and so forth. Rules of Engagement. There's a lot of these kind of JAG movies that were coming out around that time. So I always felt like, yeah, I wanted to be a JAG. So I never gave up. I just kept grinding on that and didn't take no for an answer. And then, being a federal prosecutor, as soon as I knew like, hey, I'm going to be a prosecutor, I'm like, that's what I want to do. And, I had to apply a lot. I mean, I couldn't tell you how many times, dozens of applications I put into different positions around the country. But, finally ended up in a kind of an interesting place.
Gotcha. So explain to us a little bit about that. You're working in Texas and you're applying to be a federal prosecutor. So does that mean that you're applying to basically wherever the Department of Justice needs you? So you could end up in like different parts of the country or specific areas, or how does that work?
So I was at, I'll kind of give you a little bit of the narrative. I was in Comal County prosecuting, for a number of reasons, decided I didn't want to work there anymore. And incidentally, I do again, my firm does, that I started. But the point is that it took me to East Texas, close to where I was born, and actually the town where my grandfather was born, Longview, Texas. So this is, let me put it this way. There are counties in Texas that are larger than some of the New England states, right? So like when you talk about different regions of Texas, I mean, we're talking about culturally, it's all Texas. They all love Texas. They probably like the Cowboys or, whatever. But culturally, there's hippies versus in Austin versus, rednecks and the deep South. Like, you might as well be in Mississippi. So I moved back to East Texas to Longview. My grandfather had been born there in 1909. So it was kind of cool to see like all my family's headstones from the 19th century and stuff that were out there. But part of the reason I made the jump was the DA at the time in that county combined the offer with the position to be a prosecutor in his office with being what's called a SALSA, a special assistant U.S. attorney. And so these are kind of interesting positions. They can be like temp federal prosecutor positions or often state prosecutors that are kind of deputized as a federal prosecutor. So you work in DOJ. I was working in the U.S. Attorney's Office in Tyler, right? But I was still had a state caseload as well. So you kind of are doing both state and federal. And the reason I was really interested in it was it gave me the opportunity to immediately kind of get my foot in the door, get federal experience, and make myself marketable then to becoming a full-time AUSA.
So how long did you do this for?
2 years.
Okay. And so from there, you got a chance to, I guess, what do you say the acronym was?
SAUSA, SAUSA.
Were you able to like transition to that position after this?
Yeah, no, it wasn't even transition. I mean, I went in, and as soon as I was in the office, the wheels were turning. I was getting brought into the U.S. Attorney's Office. This was the Eastern District of Texas. And so I was in the Tyler office, which is kind of the larger town to Longview, right, in East Texas. And so, yeah, I was in that position. It happened to coincide with COVID. So earlier on, I was having probably a little bit more engaged experience, and then after the fact. But yeah, it gave me, again, my initial federal experience. And it confirmed to me that I really wanted to do that just because, it was just a different vibe. I mean, in a state prosecutor's office, most of the people are extremely overworked and have, just it just feels like you're kind of constantly just spinning your wheels and running around, and there's a lot of chaos. And if you're not in a well-administered office, there can be, discrepancies in policy and so forth. Whereas in DOJ, I mean, it's the exact opposite in most offices. And I could probably give you a little more info on that. But in most offices, you have a very, I wouldn't say a very relatively small, manageable docket. You're going to spend more time on each case, but you have the luxury to do so because, you're able to pick and choose the cases you prosecute. Because you have competent state prosecutors, and because there's state analogs, if you don't like the federal case, you can kick it to the state prosecutor. So you could be choosy with the cases, very proactive. There's, a level of prestige in the legal community when it comes to being a federal prosecutor and cachet in that sense. And so it was like, again, one of these jobs that just seemed amazing to me. And kind of as testament to that, the office in Tyler, I mean, they had virtually no turnover. I mean, the people there had been there for like 20 or 30 years and wouldn't leave. So it was very difficult to get in to that office. But that was kind of their gig, and they loved it. And I kind of learned the same, and I just respected the people I was around, decided to continue to push forward.
That's awesome. And so as you're advancing your civilian career, Did you have any deployments or any long-term operations in the reserves or anything like that that would like had like anything that would have like stopped you, or were you lucky and you were able to just focus entirely on your civilian career?
Well, I mean, I'll be honest. I've never deployed. I did do an ODT mission to Germany, which was great. I got to assist on court martials in Germany and K Town, at Kleber Kaserne. And definitely augmented a lot of active units and different locales in the U.S. But most of my time, again, was just in my normal TPU reserve unit. The closest 2 times that I ever came to deploying was in 2017. I was actually slated to go with the 173rd to Afghanistan. My deployment got canceled because this was when Trump entered office and was kind of, I guess you could say, blowing the war horn against North Korea. And so all deployments got kind of canned. And I ended up in Fort Knox on a extended training there for deployment to North Korea. And so, but yeah, I've never deployed. It's one of those things where I wish I could have done, but I'm not that upset I didn't, frankly, given the wars we've been engaged in for the last 20 years.
Yeah, for sure. That's awesome. I mean, it all worked out anyway, right? And you're still in, correct?
I am. Yeah. I'm making the decision right now if I'm going to go into the IRR or, continue on. But probably in the next few weeks, I'll be, because they're filling my billet, my slot right now. And I'll have to decide if I'm going to go to another unit or, again, transfer the IRR.
Well, I was in the IMA before I got out, and he was a really nice gig. So, I mean, it was very, very nice. He worked with my schedule, so I'm sure that he works for you in your now because you own your law firm now, right?
And that's kind of, yeah, I do own my own firm. But yeah, that's kind of the consideration is, the promotion between 04 and 05 in the JAG Corps would require me to probably be a BJA, brigade judge advocate. And I've been functionally a BJA before. I've been an assistant BJA and I've been a battalion judge advocate as well. So I know the amount of work it takes. And, again, I don't want to critique the way things are being done, but, after General Lucky, Lieutenant General Lucky took over the reserve command, this would have been probably in 16, 17. That's when you started hearing about ACRC integration and the reserves are no longer a strategic force. They're now a ready force. And so metrics began being really pushed to the umpteenth, which is fine. Again, you want a ready force. You want everyone to be deployable. The problem is that the ACRC integration, I think, went too far. And so the assumption is that your op tempo would almost be the same as a active unit in terms of readiness. So you're no longer able to go in and do your Article 15s kind of on a weekend here and there. I mean, I was working 2 jobs functionally for a year and a half where I'm doing my full-time civilian job. I had active duty command in the unit I was in, the brigade I was in. And, they're working Monday through Friday, 9 to 5. And even though they have reservists as their JAGs, they're assuming we're on the clock at the same time they are. So part of that was because the JAG Corps has been hurting so bad for, JAGs and lawyers that they're having to rely and leverage on the reservists, which makes sense. But the problem is that unless you're in a job that's a government job where they're really understanding, about if you work for the feds, tons of reservists in the feds. But if you're working in the civilian sector, I mean, you're really at the graces of your boss, who's probably losing money, even though he's patriotic, but he's losing money because you're taking 2 weeks off here and there to go do training, or you run your own business. And when you're not in the office, you lose money that way as well. So, I feel that's kind of a cultural shift that the Army's either going to continue, and that's fine if they decide that works for them. But for me, it's kind of become just a difficult thing to juggle.
At the end of the day, you got to do what's best for you. I mean, that's what the Marine Corps is going to do, right? It's going to do what's best for the Army, what's best for the Marine Corps, what's best for the Navy. So you got to look out for yourself. So let's go back a little bit to your civilian career. So now you're a prosecutor. You talked about culture. What kind of crimes are you prosecuting in your office in East Texas?
It's funny. So I'll give you a little background. My family's been in Texas since 1837. So right after, we became a country. If you go back to title in some of the counties, it's my ancestors' names or the plats. So like the John J. Kennedy, you know, sector or whatever you want to call it, plat. So I mean, I feel like I understand the culture probably as well as anyone. And so just knowing about my family's history and their experiences and, even close family members, it's a very violent place. You have a culture of honor, right? So like if someone talks bad about you or your mom, you have to do something because if you don't do something right, like you're going to lose credibility in public. And so even to this day, it's a very violent place. People resort to violence very quickly. And so you have these kind of, it's a beautiful part of the country. It's pine trees and pine forests and oak trees and whatnot. But there's still, a fair amount of poverty. There's still a fair amount of racial animus. And then on top of that, you have, again, the culture where people are very nice. I mean, they'll smile and they're very nice. But if you cross them, depending on who the person is, you may end up getting in a fist fight at the very least. So we were dealing with a lot of violent crime, in part because of those factors. And of course, drugs, methamphetamines were a prevalent issue in that part of the country.
Do you see that that methamphetamine was prevalent in a specific period of time? Do you think that it changes from methamphetamine to heroin to back to methamphetamine or now not heroin but
Yeah, no.
fentanyl? Yeah. Do you think it's transient or not transient but I don't know. I think it comes with the times. It's like a fad.
There's some truth in that, because what is being produced, it's a market economy, right? I mean, if the demand's out there and people and their buddies are talking about fentanyl is so great, they may go try it. Stupid as that is, it is what it is, right? But I do feel like through my entire career, it's been largely methamphetamines have been the most prevalent narcotic. But I've seen pretty much everything from heroin to crack to coke to crocodile to fentanyl. Fentanyl is something that we're seeing, quite a bit of now. It's not extremely common, and my clients don't typically do fentanyl, but I know that it is a major issue. And so, but I still would say meth is going to be the one that if you went on a felony criminal docket, 90% of the cases that are drug related. The other one now as well is THC concentrate. And part of that is because in Texas, it's a felony, right? To have a THC concentrate. Marijuana is a misdemeanor, but because, particularly like Gen Zers, they don't want to smoke, but they think vaping is cool. They don't understand that the concentrate is actually a felony. They think it's the safer alternative to the plant matter. So you see a lot of vape cartridges and whatnot as well.
Gotcha. Yeah, no, up here, fentanyl is kicking our butts. You see that everywhere, especially in Philly. I train in Kensington, and it's everywhere. As far as meth, I haven't seen meth in years. Like just you see the old you hear about like the labs here and there, but nothing PWID distribution wide. It's just Jerry and Kevin like doing their own cooking. But in the East Coast for the most part, like marijuana is legal. Delaware is completely legal. There's a new law about dispensaries that is, I believe it passed last year. I think New Jersey is also legal. You can just purchase it. In Pennsylvania, you need to have a medical prescription. So we don't really prosecute. We don't, I think if you get caught driving with it here, you get it's the same thing as a citation. So it's very decriminalized. But so you're prosecuting over there. What kind of cases are the ones that you recall that you're the most proud of as a federal prosecutor?
Well, I mean, do you mean when I was in East Texas?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, they were kind of your grab bag cases, honestly, because it was gun and drugs, just kind of the normal type of federal case. In that office, the more interesting cases were actually my state cases, because I was able to be on some task force and, see, kind of larger scale. The statute in Texas is kind of the state analog to the federal conspiracy, but in Texas called EOCA, engaging in organized criminal activity. So, it's kind of, if you have a conspiracy, you could tack that on and get one higher level of offense. So, seeing that be done to wrap in kind of gangs into conspiracies, watching how capital murder cases are prepped and so forth as well. So, there were a lot of interesting cases that came up there. But again, that was not the stopping point from my perspective. And pretty soon into being there, about a year in, I decided, okay, now it's time. I'm going to start looking for that next door. And I began applying again to positions in the Department of Justice.
Gotcha. So, I'm sorry. In the Department of Justice, what were your cases that you saw that you were the most proud of?
Well, I mean, so I'll give you just a little bit of kind of I need to give you context, because if I don't give you context, it probably wouldn't make much sense. So I eventually, was in, again, East Texas applying, but got an opportunity to be a federal prosecutor in Alpine, Texas, which is on the complete opposite side of the state. And so, Texas is big, is bigger than France. And so I basically went from like Marseille to Brittany. I mean, along the opposite side of the country. And so went to Alpine. My wife was pregnant at this time. And so we made the long drive out, about 9 or 10 hours, maybe further. And yeah, it's a long way. And you still have 3.5 hours left of Texas from there. So, it kind of puts it in perspective. But it's up in the mountains, very rural part of West Texas, great weather, but you're at elevation about 7,000 feet. And you're in the Chihuahuan Desert, one of the most remote places in the country. So we were 70 miles to a Walmart and 3.5 hours to an airport, roughly, in Midland or El Paso. And the reason we moved there was because this is it's a nice town. There's about 6,000 people, but the majority or a large percentage of the population are in work for law enforcement of the federal government, because it's fairly close, about 85, 90 miles to the border. And it kind of is the epicenter for the Big Bend region. And so, that's a quarter of the U.S. border. We call it the quarter of the border. So you got that bend of Texas in the west. That is literally, if you extend it out, it's 1/4 of the whole border with Mexico. And so that office there was the federal prosecutors. There's really supposed to be 6 of us, but we always were understaffed. But that was the reason they put us there, was to mostly work with border crime.
Gotcha. So you're dealing with a lot of border crime. I'm sure that was very, very challenging for sure. But tell me, at least did you have a huge house, seeing that you live in like this middle of nowhere?
No, my house was Pepto-Bismol pink, and it was hilarious because you go down there and close to the border, houses become lime green and pink and blue, and but the home it's kind of funny now. Wasn't funny when it happened. We looked on Zillow. It was white, kind of had a farmhouse chic, mid-century modern look, and we roll up, and the previous owner had painted the stucco like literally Barbie pink, and all the eaves were bright blue. And my wife was about 8 months pregnant and started crying and wanted to move to a different house. And, the realtor was really smug about the whole thing. And we didn't make a stink of it because the problem in this town is it's like you're in the desert in a town, right, in the continental US, but you're basically living on an island because you have to ship everything in. So it was extremely expensive. That's why you would drive to Walmart to get groceries and whatnot, even though it was, again, about 70 plus miles away. But it was a nice home. And that was home base there for 2 years. It's where my son was born, and my daughter as well, but she ended up actually being born in El Paso, but she was supposed to be born in Alpine. But yeah, I mean, it was a great experience, and just being in a very unique part of Texas and the U.S., dealing with the cartels and alien smuggling operations, and really interfacing closely with the federal agencies, DEA, FBI, HSI, but ATF and others as well. And then putting my imprint and trying a bunch of federal cases and knocking out some bad dudes that were smuggling people and drugs into the country.
Yeah, man. Personally, I never had a case like that. But I mean, we see them all the time. Obviously, we're in a completely different part of the country, but I'm sure that our audience is no stranger to what's going on in the border, especially now. So that's awesome. That's I gotta tell you though, like, what did you guys do for fun when you guys were living there? Like, if the Walmart was an hour away, how far away were the movies or the mall or anything else? It was.
Well, the mall is 3 hours away.
Oh,
And same with Sam's and Costco. But we did have a movie theater, a small movie theater. And, I mean, the town itself, had a university, Sul Ross University, which is mostly an educational focus, like teaching institutions. And there was a rodeo there. There was a lot of festivals. I don't know if probably, there's a town called Marfa that a lot of people know about, Marfa, Texas. It was 30 miles away. There's a lot of music festivals that happen there. We're trying to make it into like Coachella. And then, you had Big Bend National Park and a lot of outdoor activities. And then just the other kind of interesting things. Carlsbad Cavern was about 4 hours away. You had Guadalupe Peak and the mountains, which is the southern kind of end of the Rockies, which was a couple hours away. So we took advantage of as much of the opportunities in that area, but we often found ourselves traveling on weekends or, going to Midland or El Paso to kind of enjoy ourselves and, kind of make it a weekend getaway as much as we could.
Yeah, no, that you have to, right? Especially living in a place like that. And you did that for 2 years, you said?
Correct. Yep.
Gotcha. So after 2 years, what was next after that?
So once I feel like I had done what I wanted to do with DOJ, and had kind of accomplished that. The question is like, okay, what really is in the next step? And I've always enjoyed working in office environments, but the problem with most office environments for me was that they're just so, if I said conformist, that would probably make me sound pretentious, but like what I mean is just, you're supposed to be a cookie cutter. You're supposed to sit at your desk, dress a certain way, say certain things, work certain hours. It's like you have to really buy into the institutional commands. Now, the Army, of course, you have to do that as well. But I never thought I would do that in a civilian environment as well. And I couldn't do it. And so I said, I need to be more creative. I need to run my own show. I always knew I could. And I think for a long time, it had been percolating in my mind of like, wouldn't it be cool to have your own practice? Like, what would that look like? And so, I thought about that for a number of years. And so what really had happened is my wife was pregnant with our second child. And she was going to deliver. And we ended up, because of the emergency, she had to be care flighted to El Paso. So, we were already kind of like, this is not a great place for us for health reasons. And there's a lot of risk involved. And we had kids and we were like, what do we do? And we didn't have any family there. My wife's family's in Oregon. And so for us to get to Oregon, we would have to drive 3 hours to an airport, get on a plane, connect with another plane, connect with another plane. So it was three legs of a plane trip in addition to the 3-hour drive. So it'd take you about 12 to 14 hours to get where you needed to be. So it wasn't a long-term play, in other words. And that really forced me to be like, okay, I got to do this and pull the trigger and, not just look for the next job. I need to go and create my own thing. And, took a lesson from Cortez and burned my ships. And we went back to where I originally started prosecuting. And I had and this is in New Braunfels, Texas. So, had an offer from an older attorney who had office space to just kind of open up shop there, and he gave me that opportunity. I'll give him a shout out, Atanasio Campos. He did me, or Nacho, as he's called, and he really did me a solid and opened the door for me and helped me kind of get at least the office situation set up and a base to kind of build the firm.
It's awesome. So what kind of law do you do now?
Criminal defense, federal and state.
Gotcha. And how long have you been doing that for?
2 years. So we just had it's been 2 years since I left DOJ, a little bit less. And we've really been blessed. I have 3 attorneys that all work for me. So 3 full-time attorneys, 3 staff. So been able to scale and grow. Currently have 2 offices now, one in Austin, one in San Antonio. And then probably sometime early next year, we're already taking cases in Dallas and Houston, but probably Q1, Q2, we'll be opening offices there as well. So, it quickly turned from a solo practice now into a multi-city statewide practice.
So I gotta ask, right? So you switched sides. Like, was there a reason, or was there a moment or anything that made you go to the defense side that you can think of, or just how did you get there?
Well, I mean, look, there's a whole host of factors, right? Because you can make any number of decisions, just the question of which is the right one. And for me, it was a calculus of freedom and the ability to kind of create my own thing, which was always very interesting to me, the idea of being an entrepreneur. And then, being able to control my schedule. And, I work more than I've ever worked, but it's not work because it's my thing. So it's a lot more enjoyable work. And then I think there's some, financial considerations, of course. I can make as much money as I want. I'm not boxed in by a salary. And for me, the risk of of having a salary was greater than the risk of not making money. And so that was just part of the calculus. And then finally, I feel like, philosophical reasons, like there was never a single person I've ever looked back on and said I shouldn't have prosecuted them. So I feel like everyone that I sent to prison deserved it. And, some of them are serving multiple life sentences. And so I feel like they deserved it. That's what they get. But at the same time, I have a certain skill set, and to be able to now use that to help everyday Americans and citizens and Texans protect their constitutional rights is also a great feeling as well. And I feel that, for me, it's the higher calling because, prosecutors feel generally, I think, pretty convicted. They should be, at least, that they're doing the right thing. But if they've never had the experience of being on the other side, they really don't, and I didn't, I'm just saying this for first-hand experience, you don't really recognize how unbalanced the scales of justice are simply because of resources. I mean, even if you're a well-off, well-to-do person, you have to expend your own capital to hire an investigator, an expert, and an attorney. And it could take, depending on the case, tens of thousands or more, depending on, what type of case. Whereas if you're a prosecutor, you never have to worry about who's cutting the check. I mean, maybe your boss tells you it's not in the budget, but at the same time, you have an in-house investigator. You have the law enforcement helping you. You have their experts. So, being able to, again, put my finger on the scales of justice and hopefully rectify it has been very fulfilling.
That's awesome. You know what? I've never heard that. And bringing it up to the forefront. You're right. I mean, anybody who's on the other side and is defending themselves or is being prosecuted, they need to put up their own money to do all the things that you said. No, absolutely. And I don't think that people realize that because they just kind of assume that.
Well, no one's underwriting your defense. And I don't mean to cut you off. I just was going to add one more thing too, which is, I would, I know this is Harvard, I'll say it, but I'm fairly conservative. And I'm from Texas, so it goes with the territory. The point is that even with like my political views, I do honor and as someone served in the military, really venerate the Constitution. And so when you have these constitutional rights, it's inherently a part of the system, or should be, that you have people that push back against the state and push back against the government and hold their feet to the fire, make sure they're meeting their burden of proof. And that is, I think, an essential part of a Republican type of system where we have these rights and so forth. Because if you aren't pushing back, it's very easy for there to be, I would say as I don't want to call it slippage. It's probably making up a word, but you degrade into some form of tyranny or some form of system where rights are trampled upon. And so defense attorneys, I think, should be the bulwark and in between to ensure that our system continues to function and that rights are preserved. And, people had asked me, they go, how do you deal with, a situation where someone is guilty? And I say, well, it's not my fault if they get off. That's the state's fault for not meeting their burden. And if they get off because their rights were violated, that's a good thing. That protects you and me as well. So anyway, without being long-winded, that's kind of my philosophical rationale.
Absolutely. So you're now a defense attorney, and I know that you are a writer as well, right? And you have a book coming out, or a book that you're finishing, the book of the Scribe. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I appreciate you bringing it up because this is something, it's more of a passion project. My hobby is writing, and so I've published, self-published, and I've had books published as well. I think I'm at either 4 or 5 at this point, and one of them was my master's thesis, which was published by Arctos out of London, and they took it and actually published it. I've been working on the Book of the Scribe as kind of I don't want to call it a magnum opus, that would be the closest word for it. It's really my, passion project. I've been working on it since 2007, and it's, the repository of many of my philosophical, ideas and conceptions and, issues that I've weighed and thought about. And it's all placed within kind of a narrative context.
Gotcha. So it's not written in meditations, right? It's just, you can follow it as a narrative. Is it more so not episodic, but I guess chronological as you've changed and gained more insight? Or does the book reflect that as well?
No, because I want to say some of that's been dealt with in the editing process, but largely, the text is intact. A way to describe it would be, if the Bible and the Lord of the Rings had a love child, it would be my book. If you threw in, some type of maybe Nietzsche into the mix, but largely my underlying philosophy of life and the way I viewed, the way I like to interact with the world and what I champion, the values and virtues that I champion, I think have been largely consistent. And so maybe there's been some nuance in terms of the editing process to bring things more into my current and present views. But in general, I actually look back and say, it's a fairly consistent work. I've just refined some of my thoughts and arguments in certain, fine details.
So where can we find this? Is there like in your website? Is it, if I go to your website, like can I find your work, or do I need to look for it in a different publisher, or how can someone purchase this book?
So currently it's in production. We have one of the absolute top-notch, best book designers working on this, and he's incredible. I could give you titles he worked on, but they probably wouldn't be that familiar. But just very beautiful books. So it's in production. We already have the cover design. We're working on the interior design work as well, and we have a Facebook Facebook page. If you just look up the Book of the Scribe, it'll be probably one of the top ones that'll pull up. You'll see the red cover. And so if if your listeners will like the page, we'll be providing updates on the pre-sale. There's going to be a limited edition, kind of collector's edition copy that we're getting produced. They'll have gilt edges and some nice ribbon bookmarks, and really beautiful cover that'll have gold foil and so forth. So I'm really excited. I think it's going to be, again, a high-end production, and we're going to be putting out info. So they just look up, again, the Book of the Scribe on Facebook. They'll, your listeners, you guys can find the page and follow it, and then we'll be providing ordering details in due time.
Gotcha. Yeah, for sure. We'll put the address at the show notes and your website as well. In the other links to read your other works as well. I'll get it from you after this. Now, it looks like you're right whenever you have any leisure time. It seems that you're working a lot. When do you find time for yourself? When do you do things for you? And what are those things that you like to do other than writing? Whenever you're off work.
Well, this is a really interesting kind of question. I don't have hobbies, right? I don't know if I even believe in hobbies. And part of this is because I used to have a lot of hobbies when I was single, and I felt like I needed to fill up my time. You're chasing chicks and then you're doing hobbies. And I look back on that and feel like I was wasting a lot of time. So it's interesting, as I've kind of progressed, and now I'm in my late 30s and have a family, and so forth, in a business, I feel like I've become much more focused on high impact activities. And so I can really, if I'm not with my family or working out, I'm at work. And then, when we do activities, I'm with my family. One kind of, I would say, exception is Freemasonry. I'm a Freemason. I'm past master of Centennial Lodge number 500. Was actually the charter master. And I'm also a member of the Harvard Lodge, which is a Masonic lodge under the Grand Lodge of Massachusetts, which is for individuals, men that are connected with Harvard of some form or fashion. So they're either a student, alumni, staff, or faculty.
Gotcha. When you say workout, what do you do? Are you a CrossFitter? Are you old school pump and iron? Do you run? What do you do?
No, there was a time I was powerlifting. So, I hit some PRs on my lifts, and, but yeah, I basically kind of gave up the powerlifting. I've been more doing it now for functional fitness and aesthetic, but that's really just me, lifting free weights, in the gym. I did Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu for a number of years. It's been a number of years since I've done Jiu-Jitsu, but now that my son is 3, the gym that's close to our house actually has a class for 3-year-olds. So on Monday, I'm going to jump back into it. So I can be a good example, because I'm going to have my son in martial arts. And, but other than that, man, it's, pretty simple kind of focus for me. And I think that's the best way.
Yeah, for sure. Funny that you say that. My daughter is also 3, and she's been rolling since she was like 2 years old. So it's great for kids, and seeing you do it is half the battle, right? Do you know what studio you're going to do it at, or not?
Yeah, so luckily, we live outside of Austin. There's a gym. I think it's Atos, ATOS. It's kind of a chain, but they have a studio that's probably like half a mile from our home, and they have a 3 to 5 year old class that I'm going to put my son in. But I do play rugby on occasion. I played for HBS when I was at Harvard, for that season that I was on campus. And, so there are occasions when I'll still go out and play pickup games with some of the locals. But in general, it's just now focusing on the gym.
Yeah, awesome. Um, do you have any other sports or good activities? Just working out, hanging out, right? No, right?
Well, no, I mean, look, I'm not just sitting at home staring at a wall. I mean, that's not kind of how I am. I never stop. But I'm always reading. I'm always learning. I'm engaged in my religious community. And then again, my business really has taken on the majority of my free time because, I have the responsibility to make payroll and to expand the practice. And so that's become, kind of the focus for me. Whereas, when I worked for the government, state or federal, right? I mean, you're going to get a paycheck. You don't have to worry about making payroll. And, some people are like, yeah, that's why I do it. Great. For me, that was not what I wanted to do, but I had a lot more free time because if you aren't working on a case, you can do whatever you want. And I just, for right now, I don't have that luxury.
Yeah, man. Entrepreneurs have to work, man, and but the best part of it is you're working for you, so it's not work, like you said.
I never trade it.
Yeah,
Absolutely not. Never go back.
awesome. Now, where can someone get in touch with you? Somebody wants to reach out to you, whether it's a client to network, to just learn more about you. How can people get a hold of you?
Oh, I'm on every major social platform. If you just look up Lance Kennedy Law, you're gonna find me. My website is lancekennedy.com. That's my website for my practice, and that's more focused again on the legal work that I do. But if anyone wants to contact me, my email is lance@lancekennedy.com. And feel free to reach out. I am always happy to meet people and field questions or get to know people, and always interested in both the veteran and Harvard communities and how I can intersect and help people.
For sure. And we'll add all your contact info to the show notes. I know that a lot of people prefer LinkedIn. Do you have a preferred social media platform that you navigate, or?
I mean, if you message me on LinkedIn, I'll answer. But again, email is great because I check that more frequently than anything. And but really, if you message me on LinkedIn or Instagram or Facebook, I'm going to get the message. But the most surefire way to get a hold of me is to email me, lance@lancekennedy.com.
Gotcha. Now, any advice that you could give with to anyone that is looking to join or taking a similar path to you, right? Someone who is an attorney, who is in law school, who maybe is going to law school and is thinking about the JAG Corps. What advice would you give them that you wish you had?
I mean, this is kind of one of those things where hindsight's 2020, but the journey is what makes you into who you are. I mean, if I really, I have no regrets, and that's just because again, there's no reason to regret anything, because if you do, you're wasting time. That's just my view. I learn from it, and move on. But I feel like I would have been a little bit more focused. I would have understood kind of really how high the bar is for really some of the positions I was going after, and maybe I would have saved a year or two here and there, which would have been great. But so I would say if you make mistakes on your way, that's okay. You can look online like Gary Vee and Hormozy and all these guys, you can make mistakes. That's something I think that's okay. I had an unconventional path. It was always, baffled me when I go in an interview and people would ask you why you went to grad school after law school. And I'm like, well, because I wanted to. Who cares? It was Harvard. But it was a great experience, and but particularly these people in DA's offices, they just couldn't get their head around like someone didn't have the exact trajectory that they did. And, they're still stuck in that office. I'm not. So my point is like, don't let someone ever tell you, you have to follow a set path. Otherwise you're not going to achieve your goals. And the other thing is just never give up. I mean, grind. Don't let people ever tell you can't do it. If you try enough, you're going to optimize yourself for the solution. And that is as long as you're reflecting, right? So pain plus reflection equals progress. So if you're not getting the result, look at your machine, like the output you're getting, and then figure out what you need to optimize in order to get the output you want. So for me, that's why I had to go through several, different application processes, really for every step that I've ever been to. I never have had like a straight shot to get in the door. So again, just have a focus. Don't be afraid of making mistakes, and then reflect and never give up.
Gotcha. A true trailblazer. So Lance, do you have anything else for us?
I mean, no, man, it's an honor to be here, to even be considered for this podcast. I mean, you got some like high speed dudes. I'm just some reserve pogue and jag off. But that being said, it's a great community to be a part of. Again, being part of the Harvard community, and then being part of the veteran community or the military community. And so just having the opportunity to kind of have them intersect in one place and maybe, get to meet some people is a great opportunity. And so I'm honored to be here, and I want to thank you for having me.
Of course. Thanks for being here. So Lance, that concludes our interview. Thanks so much for being here, and we'll be in touch through email. Does that sound good?
Absolutely. Absolutely, man. Thank you so much.
Thank you. All right. Have a good one.
You too. Bye.
Bye.
So join us as we connect, bridge, and honor the Harvard veteran community. Subscribe to our podcast to stay updated on the latest episodes, and share your feedback with us on our website. Thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you in the next episode.